bigger house, or just we live in this culture that's constantly celebrating drivenness. All the while, they're losing the things that matter most in the process of it. Right? In fact, it's interesting when the Bible actually speaks about drivenness. What I find really interesting is it actually doesn't refer to it in a positive connotation. In fact, every time you read about drivenness, it's actually spoken of in a very negative context. And in fact, we see this in Genesis chapter 4, verses 11 through 12. And in fact, actually, I referred to this last week in talking about how the importance of being planted in a church, and how being a wanderer is actually considered connected to being a curse. It's connected to walking in a curse of God rather than the blessing of God. But what's interesting, when you look at this verse, it's not just wandering that's connected to a curse. But check this out. Genesis 4:11 says, "Now you're under a curse," and get this, driven from the ground. This is Cain and Abel here. I mean, again, this is after Cain has killed his brother unjustly. And so here's this curse that's been placed on him. And it says, "Now you're under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Again, it's this attachment of drivenness, and how drivenness can, if we're not careful, it can be a curse. This constant doing more, trying to get more, trying to be more. And then when we get there, it's never enough. It's just like the carrot at the stick. It just kind of keeps, it's always out in front of us. Like the greyhound chasing the little rabbit around the track. It's like, it's constantly go, 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 right? That was good timing right there, actually, yeah. It's like an alarm, just constantly, pushing us. And again, I share this because, and by the way, in sharing this too, I'm not saying that all drivenness is bad. Like there's an element of some motivation in life that is a good thing, right? I mean, again, we're talking not about the lazy life, we're talking about the led life, we're talking about moving forward. There's some movement there. But where our drivenness can become a curse, where it can become a negative in our lives, where the enemy can really use it to steal so much from our lives, is on two levels. On two levels. It's when it allows us, one, to doubt who we are. To doubt who we are. Some weeks ago, I was watching a documentary on Lance Armstrong. You remember who Lance Armstrong was? Yeah. Bicycle is great, and at least for a season there. And he, when he was at this documentary, as I was watching, kind of gave this whole biography, this whole history of just his achievements, and it was pretty amazing. I mean, after Greg LeMond, we thought, there would never be as great of an American rider as Greg LeMond, but then Lance Armstrong shows up, and he just wins one Tour de France after the next. In fact, he gets to the point where he wins 7 Tour de France's. Just unheard of, right? And one of those, the last one, was actually when he was, kind of recovering on the mend from cancer. I mean, it was just amazing. And so here's this guy. He's on the top of the cycling world. Everybody loves him. Everyone thinks the world of him. He's called the greatest sportsman, one of the greatest athletes of all time. And it would all come crashing down. All come crashing down in a 30-minute interview with Oprah. Because here's the deal. Like you can hide from the government, you can hide from the news, but you cannot hide from Oprah, right? And so Oprah sits him down, and in an Oprah way, it basically kind of starts this conversation. It's like, hey, here's these rumors out here that maybe in all of your striving, all your drive for greatness, that maybe, just maybe, you didn't play by the rules in this. And so, again, classic Oprah way. She has a way of phrasing things that just softens a heart. And next thing we know, we got Lance Armstrong. Tears are kind of starting to well up in his eyes, and he just lays it all out there. Incredible detail. Just the extent he was willing to go to make this drive and to be in this pursuit of greatness, this pursuit of being something, of achieving something. being, acclaimed and being famous. And he talks about his doping, and he talks about, all these, the ways that he would, take advantage of some of the other riders around there, and his cheating, and yet I share all that, and listen, I don't bring up Lance Armstrong to kind of throw him under the bus or share a story of a guy that fell from grace, because reality is, if you're a believer in Jesus, there's no such thing as a fall from grace. We fall into his grace, right? And the Bible says his grace is sufficient regardless of anything in your life. But I bring it up because there's something at the end of the interview that he said that man, just really struck me. It really hit me. And in all the process of all this driving for greatness and being pushed to the edge, not just physically, not just health-wise, but in many cases being pushed over the edge, where he would compromise on character, compromise on integrity, all for the sake of, driving to be great. He gets to the end of the interview and he says, you know what? Somewhere along the line, I lost myself in all this. I lost myself in all this. And I share that, and it really struck me, because isn't that ultimately that's what the enemy's goal is? When it comes to this drivenness of constantly living on the edge, one of his ultimate goals is to get you to lose sight of who you really are, to doubt who you are, to lose yourself in all the rush and all the busyness and all the hurriness and all the trying to live for the expectations and opinions of others and what other people think you should do and what you feel like you got to get to and you got to always get done, and that somehow your value is based on what you do as opposed to who you are in Christ. And listen, I share all this because this is where sort of this law of Sabbath comes into play. This law of Sabbath comes into play. Why it's so significant. In fact, when we talk about kind of living this pace of grace, what does that even look like? What does it look like to live a led life, right? And to really understand that, you have to understand Sabbath. You have to understand this law of Sabbath. And we find this in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And chapter 5, verse 12, it goes on and says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now, when it's talking about Sabbath, it's talking about a day, a 24-hour time period that's set aside. It's different than any other day. It's separate. And in fact, I love this because, interesting enough, this is modeled by God. This is not just something that God said. It's something actually he modeled in the very formation of the world. Again, 6 days he worked, and then on the seventh, he rested. And it wasn't because he was tired. It wasn't because he was exhausted. It's because he needed a little me time. No, he was doing it to model this pace of grace, to model what a led life really looks like, what a led life as opposed to a driven life is really meant to be all about, this rhythm, right? And it goes on, verse 13, and here's where I love this. It starts to get really cool. It says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. In other words, in short, take a rest, take a breath, catch your breath. Have a day where you can catch your breath. But here's what I love, verse 15. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now, it's not a recommendation, not a good suggestion. It's a command. Take some time. To take a breath. Find some rest in a busy week. Live out this pace of grace, right? But what I love, that verse 15, there's that part there that is so significant. It says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember that you were. See, this is getting to the heart of why Sabbath. This wasn't just, because God wanted to, put some, unachievable expectation on us, like, hey, I know you're busy, I know you got all stuff, but hey, I want you to, go with one less day in your week, just to make it tough on you, just to make it a challenge for you. That's not what he's getting at. Now, this part here gets to the very heart of it. So you got to understand something about the nation of Israel. Is that, again, but before this command is given, this was given after they had just spent 400 years of slavery in Egypt. 400 years of being driven. In fact, the Bible actually describes, their time there being driven by these slave masters. People are constantly cracking the whip. You've got to do more. You've got to achieve more. But like a day off, a break, that was non-existent in the life of an Israelite slave, right? And so you need to understand that that's kind of what they're coming from. And even though they get this law, even though they're being led into the wilderness, much like Jesus was led into the wilderness in Matthew 3 and 4, even though they've got this, even though they're free, they've been set free, they're still trying to figure out how to live free, which I think many of us as believers can kind of relate to. How many of us, it's like we've been set free, but we're still struggling with ways to really live free in our lives. And so he's trying to kind of change some of their thinking. He's trying to change some of their patterns, especially in relation to their past. And I love this. He says, remember that you were. See, here's the point, and here's the heart of Sabbath, was that Sabbath was meant to remind them that what they were is not who they are. It was ultimately meant to remind them that what they were, yeah, you were slaves, but that's not who you are now. Who you are now is you're free. Who you are now is you're chosen. Who you are now is you're the people of God. Your sons, your daughters, you're the people. You're my people. See, who they were was slaves, and for slave life, it was all about the work. It was all about production. Your value is in your work. Your value is what you did. And here's God saying, listen, in taking a day for Sabbath, you're reminding yourself that who you were is not who you are. Who you were is not who you are. You're reminding yourself that while work has value, your value is not your work. But your value is who you are in Christ. Who you are as a people of God, as sons, as daughters, as children of God. The God who chose you. Not because you achieved anything. Because you accomplished anything. Not because of what you do or what you got. But just because of who you are in Him. Because of His grace. It's not because we're that good, but because He's so great. And listen, I share this because I think this is important for us, and it really kind of gets to, really behind the scenes of, I think, so many of our kind of ridiculous schedules and our tendency to live these driven lives constantly pushed to the edge, is that I think for a lot of us, this has less to do with poor time management and more to do with just a poor view of who we are. Rather than living this life, of really walking in who God has already proclaimed you to be. As chosen, as loved, as cherished, as accepted. We have this tendency, and the enemy, again, he loves to kind of play on this tendency to try to get us to live a life and live under an identity that we're not. He tries to say, try to get us to live this kind of slave life. Slave to our schedule, slave to the expectations of others, slaves to just our crazy drive for more. And yet God in the Sabbath is sitting there saying, man, no. I want you to take a break. Because in taking that break, you're really what you're doing is you're making a statement of faith. You're basically saying to the enemy, listen, I don't have anything I've got to prove to you. I'm going to stand in what God has already proclaimed about my life, about who I really am. In fact, the flip side of that is when we don't take a break, when we don't really follow this command of the Sabbath, really what we're saying is and really what we're proclaiming is that, hey, not that I'm free, not that I'm chosen, but that I'm a slave. Because think about it, slaves back then, they didn't get days off, right? There was no time off as a slave. In fact, I like how Tim Keller writes this and kind of speaks to this. It says, anyone who cannot obey God's command to observe the Sabbath, to take a break, right, in your week, to live this pace of grace, is a slave, even if it's a self-imposed one. Your own heart, or our materialistic culture, or an exploitive organization, or all the above will be abusing you if you don't have the ability to be disciplined in your practice of the Sabbath. And listen, I wonder for some of us, rather than living the life we've been called to live, living at the pace God's called us to live, living in the identity that He's proclaimed over your life as a free, chosen child, son and daughter of God. How many of us have settled on living lives based on who we were? Because we think that somehow I got to prove something to myself. I got to prove something to others. Maybe I feel like I got to prove something to God. And so we live as slaves, never taking a break. Constantly on the go, putting 50, 60 hours in a week, trying to get that promotion, or it's the mom, the dad, or maybe the grandparent that's just going crazy, trying to get their kid from one activity to the next, never stopping, never pausing, never taking a break. Some of us, it's the person who's constantly living surrendered to the people's opinions of you, their take on you, constantly worried about what others think, and so as a result, we're just constantly on the go. Do. I got to be more. I got to achieve more, because in doing more, that somehow that makes me more of who I really am, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. And so that's where I say that this drivenness, that's when drivenness can be a bad thing. It's when we allow the enemy to use it in our lives that gets to doubt who we really are. But here's the second one, is that he doesn't just use our drivenness. More drivenness can become a curse in our lives. It's not just when we doubt who we are, but it's when we doubt who He is. It's when we doubt who He is. And in fact, it's interesting when God's giving these laws to the nation of Israel. The law of Sabbath, it wasn't actually that wasn't the only law He gave in relation to their pace. He gave some other laws that would really speak to their pace of life and gives a picture of what it is to walk in sort of a pace of grace. One was the law of the tithe. It was giving back to God. And don't worry, this is not a giving message, so you can take a break. But it was the law of the tithe. As the nation of Israel was starting to kind of get going, as they were still in the promised land, what happens is there's a very agrarian society, and so they would have these farms. Oftentimes they were very small farms. They were typically one family or a couple families would share that farm. And God's command was, I want you to take a tenth of that, the first fruits of that, and I want you to put it in a basket. As every single house in the nation of Israel, they would have a basket where they would put the tenth. In fact, in Deuteronomy, that's why it speaks of, you'll bring a basket of your first fruits to the temple of the Lord. It's just this ideal of giving it to God. And they would give this tenth to help kind of take care of the people of God, those who were in need. But again, it was also an act of worship. And now, that's a law most of us, we understand. Most of us have heard, the importance, the principle of the tenth. But there's another law, though, with cusp of that maybe we haven't always heard about. That's the law of gleaning. The law of gleaning. And this law was, again, these are pictures of the pace that God has called us to live, this pace of grace. And the law of gleanings was basically when it came to these farms, what it said was what I want you to do is I want you to leave the edges for those in need. It's like when you're harvesting your crop, the very edges of your field, I want you to leave for those who are in need. I want you to leave it for passerbys, for foreigners. I want you to leave it for other people. Even the law of gleaning even referred to the tithe. Like whenever they filled their basket on the tithe and something fell out of the basket, the law commanded that they not be allowed to pick that up, like to leave it there. Now again, and this is why I love this. Again, what it's speaking about, what it's really getting at, is this picture of margin, of space, creating space ultimately for God to move, space for God to do a work. Because and again, you get to think, man, how hard this would have been. So often we're like, man, taking a day off, creating space, creating margin when it comes to my finances, margin when it comes to my relationships, margin when it comes to my pace of life. How can I do that? But again, think about this. These were former slaves. They're coming out of Egypt, coming out of the wilderness. They're trying to create a nation. They've got nothing. They're living from hand to mouth. And yet here's God sitting there saying, man, I want you to create space. I want you to create space in your finances. I want you to create space in your life, space in your situation, space enough for me to move. I want you to trust me in this. I want you to trust me in this. And again, it's this whole ideal. And why is this so important? Is because the enemy, part of the drive, part of the reason so many of us, we live on the edge, is because instead of trusting God, trusting God's going to show up, trusting that maybe in this area of like finances, that it's this trust of God that listen, I believe that God can do more with 90% of what I give than 100% of what I try to hold on to, right? Or I should say 10%. 90%. If you're really generous and you want to give today 90%, go for it. Way to go. But it's this belief in this ideal, right? And so, again, it's this creating space, and so many of us, we struggle with this because, again, where the enemy tries to get us a little on the edge, he wants us to doubt ultimately who God is, to doubt his care, to doubt his provision. In fact, Jesus actually speaks of this too in Matthew chapter 6. Check this out, in verse 25 it says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? I love that. Again, it goes back to that fact of your worth, right? Like you're valuable, not because of anything you've done or achieved, but just because